Emily Carter lounged on a sun-drenched beach in the Hamptons, the salty breeze tangling her auburn hair as she sipped a margarita. At 25, she was Hollywood's rising star, her face plastered on billboards for her latest rom-com. Today, though, she wasn't celebrating a box office hit. She was toasting the end of her marriage to Ethan Grant, a tech billionaire whose name dominated Silicon Valley headlines. Their divorce papers, signed just a week ago, had freed her from a year-long arrangement that felt more like a business deal than a marriage. Her friends had cheered when she'd sent the papers to Ethan, calling it her liberation from a cold transactional union. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of coral and gold, Emily felt a fleeting sense of triumph. She was finally free. Her phone buzzed, shattering the moment. A news alert flashed across the screen. Tech prodigy, Ethan Grant found dead at 30. Emily froze, the glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the deck. The article described Ethan's suicide, discovered in his sleek San Francisco penthouse. The media painted him as a genius who'd built a tech empire worth billions by his late 20s, revolutionizing AI software. Reporters speculated on stress or burnout, but no one knew why he'd taken his life. Emily's heart pounded, her mind racing back to their last interaction, a curt exchange of signatures, his face unreadable. She'd assumed he was as eager to end their marriage as she was. Now doubt crept in, sharp and unsettling. As she scrolled through the article, a shadow fell over her. Henry, the elderly butler who'd served Ethan's family for decades, stood before her, his white hair stark against his weathered face. His eyes, usually steady, were rimmed with grief. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice trembling. "I need to speak with you. It's about Mr. Grant." Emily's stomach churned. She followed him to a quiet corner of the beachfront villa, away from the chatter of her friends. Henry clasped his hands, his knuckles whitening. Before he passed, Mr. Grant left explicit instructions. His entire estate, every dollar, every share, every property, has been willed to you. Emily's breath caught. Ethan's fortune was staggering, a vast sum she couldn't fathom. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Their marriage had been a deal, not a love story. Her father's media company, Carter Communications, had teetered on the edge of bankruptcy 2 years ago. At 22, Emily, the dutiful daughter, had agreed to marry Ethan to secure a bailout. She'd walked into the marriage expecting distance, maybe even disdain from a man who seemed to view her as a contractual obligation. Ethan had wired the funds the day they registered their marriage, but his only words were, "The money had been sent." She'd smiled tightly, masking the sting, and replied, "Pleasure doing business, Mr. Grant." They'd lived apart. He was in his San Francisco high-rise, and she was in a Malibu villa he'd bought but never visited. She'd assumed he hated her, just as she'd grown to resent the weight of their arrangement. Henry's gaze softened, as if reading her thoughts. "Ms. Carter, there's something you need to see. Mr. Grant, he wasn't what you thought." He hesitated, then added, "He loved you. Deeply. That year of marriage, despite everything, was the happiest of his life." Emily's mind reeled. Loved her, Ethan had never shown it, not in words, not in actions. He'd avoided her, his demeanor icy, his life consumed by boardrooms and algorithms. Henry's words felt like a riddle she wasn't ready to solve. "Come with me," he urged. "There's a place in Manhattan you need to visit. It'll explain everything." Emily nodded, numb, as Henry arranged a private jet back to New York. Her friends called after her, their voices fading as she left the Hamptons behind. The flight was a blur, her thoughts tangled with memories of Ethan, his sharp jawline, quiet intensity, the way he'd always seemed just out of reach. She recalled their wedding day, a sterile affair at City Hall. No rings, no vows, just a contract signed in silence. She'd told herself it didn't matter that she was saving her family. But now, with Ethan gone, a hollow ache settled in her chest. What had she missed? As the jet landed, Emily's phone buzzed again. Another alert. Grant's suicide sparks questions about his private life. The article mentioned his disability, a prosthetic leg from a teenage car accident, speculating it might have fueled his isolation. Emily's throat tightened. She'd known about his injury but never pressed him about it, assuming his distance was personal, not a shield for deeper pain. Henry drove her through Manhattan's glittering streets to a nondescript building in Chelsea. They rode a creaky elevator to a loft, and when Henry unlocked the door, Emily's breath caught. The space was a shrine to her. A massive oil painting dominated one wall, Emily, in a wedding dress, radiant, smiling, a dress she'd never worn. At the bottom, in Ethan's precise handwriting, were the words, "May Emily always be happy." Shelves held mementos, photos of her playing piano at her Chicago high school's anniversary, a poorly sewn doll from her art class, and a snapshot from her graduation where she'd given a speech. In the crowd, a teenage Ethan held his phone capturing her moment, his shy smile barely visible. Emily's eyes burned. "He was there," she whispered. Henry nodded. "Mr. Grant followed your life for years, long before the marriage. He never told you, but he adored you." Emily's legs buckled, and she sank onto a nearby chair. She'd thought Ethan despised their marriage, that he'd married her out of pity or obligation. But this loft told a different story of quiet, obsessive devotion. She traced the painting's frame, her fingers trembling. "Why didn't he say anything?" she asked, her voice breaking. Henry's eyes glistened. "He was afraid. His leg, his past, it made him feel unworthy. He thought you'd never love him back." Emily's mind flashed to Ethan's cold words during their marriage. "No wedding. Don't tell anyone we're married." She'd heard disdain, but now she wondered if it was shame, a shield for a heart too fragile to risk rejection. As she stood in the loft, surrounded by fragments of a love she'd never seen, regret crashed over her like a tidal wave. Ethan was gone, and she'd never known the truth until now. Emily Carter stood frozen in the dimly lit Manhattan loft, her eyes tracing the contours of the oil painting that dominated the space. It depicted her in a flowing wedding dress, her smile radiant, her auburn hair catching imagined sunlight. The canvas, signed with Ethan Grant's precise handwriting, bore a simple wish: "May Emily always be happy." The words pierced her, each syllable a reminder of the love she'd never acknowledged. Around her, the loft was a museum of her life. Snapshots from her Chicago high school days, a clumsily sewn doll from an art class, a faded program from her senior year piano recital. In one photo taken at her graduation, a teenage Ethan stood in the crowd, his phone raised to capture her as she delivered her valedictorian speech. His shy smile, barely visible, hinted at a devotion she'd never suspected. Henry, the elderly butler, stood by the door, his white hair stark against the loft's soft lighting. His hands trembled as he spoke. "Mr. Grant kept this place secret, Ms. Carter. He came here when he needed to feel close to you." Emily's throat tightened. She'd spent their year-long marriage convinced Ethan despised her, that their union was a mere transaction to save her family's failing media company, Carter Communications. She recalled their wedding day at City Hall, a sterile exchange of signatures, Ethan's curt. "The money's been wired," which felt like a slap, confirming her role as the weaker party in a deal. She'd responded with a forced smile. "It was a pleasure doing business, Mr. Grant," hiding the sting of his indifference. They'd lived apart, he in his San Francisco penthouse, she in the Malibu villa he'd bought but never visited. She'd assumed he wanted nothing to do with her. Now surrounded by relics of her life, Emily's certainty crumbled. "He was at my graduation," she asked, her voice barely audible. Henry nodded. "He was 17, just a year after his accident. He saw you speak, and something in him changed. He never told you, but he followed your life ever since." Emily's fingers brushed the graduation photo, Ethan's young face alight with quiet admiration. She remembered that day standing at the podium, nervous but proud. She'd never noticed him in the crowd, never imagined someone like Ethan Grant, already a prodigy in tech circles, despite his injury, would care about her. The loft held more, a notebook with her name in Ethan's handwriting, filled with notes about her favorite coffee shop, her go-to sushi order, her habit of humming show tunes absent-mindedly. A shelf displayed DVDs of every film she'd starred in, from bit parts to her recent blockbuster. Each item screamed a truth she'd missed: Ethan hadn't hated her. He'd obsessively and silently loved her in a way she'd never reciprocated. "Why didn't he tell me?" she whispered, tears welling. Henry's eyes softened. Mr. Grant felt unworthy. The car accident at 16 took his left leg below the knee. His parents, cold and ambitious, saw him as flawed after that. "He believed you'd see him the same way, a broken man, not good enough for you." Emily's mind flashed to their marriage, to Ethan's sharp tone when he'd said no wedding. "Don't tell anyone we're married." She'd heard disdain assumed he was ashamed of her. Now she wondered if he'd been hiding his shame, shielding a heart scarred by rejection. Henry stepped closer, his voice low. "When you filed for divorce, it broke him. He thought he'd lost his last chance at happiness. That's why—" He trailed off, unable to say the word suicide. Emily's chest ached. She'd celebrated the divorce thinking it freed her from a loveless arrangement. She hadn't seen Ethan's devastation or known he'd poured his heart into this hidden shrine. She turned to the painting, its details meticulous, every dress fold, every glint in her eyes rendered with care. "He painted this?" she asked. Henry nodded. "He spent months on it imagining a wedding you never had. He wanted you to be happy, even if he wasn't part of it." Emily's knees buckled, and she sank onto a velvet couch, her ignorance crushing her. She'd spent a year resenting Ethan, blind to his love. Her family's company had been saved, but at what cost? Her ruthless media mogul father had pushed her into the marriage to secure the bailout, caring little for her feelings. Her mother, distant and preoccupied with socialite galas, offered no comfort. Emily had learned to bury her emotions to play the part of the dutiful daughter, the poised actress. She'd carried that armor into her marriage, keeping Ethan at a distance, assuming he wanted the same. Now, standing in this loft, she saw the truth. Ethan hadn't been cold, he'd been afraid. Afraid she'd reject him, afraid his prosthetic leg made him less than whole. She thought of the media's reports calling him a prodigy, but never mentioning his disability as if it diminished his brilliance. She'd known about his leg, but never asked, never bridged the gap between them. Regret surged hot and bitter. "I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought he hated me." Henry placed a hand on her shoulder. "You couldn't have known, Ms. Carter. He hid it too well. But you need to see this." He handed her a sealed letter with her name in Ethan's handwriting. She opened it, her hand shaking. "Emily, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I loved seeing you at our high school, shining brighter than anyone. I never deserved you, but I hoped you'd find happiness. Everything I have is yours. Be happy always. Ethan." Tears streamed down her face, blurring the ink. She clutched the letter, her heart screaming at the unfairness of it all. She'd failed him, and now he was gone. The room spun, the walls closing in. Her vision darkened, and she collapsed, the letter slipping from her fingers. When her eyes fluttered open, she was no longer in the loft. Loud music pulsed in her ears, a crowded Los Angeles nightclub replacing the quiet shrine. She was seated at a bar, surrounded by laughing friends, and a banner was overhead reading Emily's divorce party. Her heart raced. She was back a year earlier, the night she'd sent Ethan the divorce papers. The realization hit like lightning. She'd been reborn, given a second chance to save him, to rewrite their story. Her hands trembled with purpose. Ignoring her friends' cheers, she stood and bolted for the door. Ethan was alive, and she wouldn't lose him again. Emily Carter's pulse raced as she stumbled out of the Los Angeles nightclub, the neon lights blurring into streaks of pink and blue. The banner overhead, Emily's divorce party, felt like a mockery now, a cruel reminder of the mistake she'd made in her past life. She was 24 again, reborn into the night she'd sent Ethan Grant the divorce papers, her heart still raw from the Manhattan loft's revelations. The music faded behind her as she pushed through the crowd, her friends' voices calling after her. "Emily, where are you going?" "The party's just starting." She didn't look back. She had a second chance to save Ethan and wouldn't waste it. In the quiet of her rented Porsche, parked under a palm tree, Emily's mind drifted to the past, to the choices that had led her to this moment. 2 years ago, at 22, she'd been a struggling actress, fresh off a few commercial gigs, when her father, Richard Carter, summoned her to his Chicago office. The family's media empire, Carter Communications, was crumbling. Bad investments, a failed streaming platform, and a string of lawsuits had drained its coffers. Richard, a towering man with a voice like gravel, didn't mince words. "We're bankrupt unless you do this, Emily," he'd said, sliding a contract across his mahogany desk. It was a marriage proposal, not from a suitor, but from Ethan Grant, a 28-year-old tech billionaire whose AI software had reshaped Silicon Valley. Emily had stared at the contract, her stomach twisting. "Why me?" she'd asked. Richard's eyes narrowed. His people reached out. "They want a partnership, and you're our leverage. Marry him, secure the bailout, and we're saved." Her mother, Lillian, perched on a leather chair, barely looked up from her phone. "It's just business, darling," she'd said, her tone as cold as the champagne she sipped at galas. Emily had grown up in their shadow. Richard's relentless ambition, Lillian's detached elegance, learning to bury her feelings early. At 16, she'd been sent to a private school in Chicago after Richard's wealth surged, leaving behind her public school friends. She'd been skinny shy and stammered under pressure, an easy target for bullies, until Jake Miller, a charismatic classmate, stepped in. His protection had felt like friendship, but it came with strings she'd only later recognize. The marriage to Ethan wasn't love, it was duty. Emily had agreed, telling herself it was temporary, a sacrifice for the family. She'd met Ethan only once before signing at a sterile boardroom in San Francisco. He was striking tall with jet black hair and piercing green eyes, but his demeanor was icy, his words clipped. "This is a transaction," he'd said, adjusting his cufflinks. "We both get what we need." She'd nodded, her pride swallowing the hurt. At City Hall, their wedding was a formality, no vows, no rings, just signatures on a license. Ethan wired $50 million to Carter Communications that day, his only comment, "The money's been sent." Emily forced a smile, masking the sting. "Pleasure doing business, Mr. Grant," she'd replied, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. She'd moved into the Malibu villa. He'd bought a glass-walled mansion overlooking the Pacific, but Ethan never stayed there. She assumed he wanted distance and saw her as a necessary inconvenience. Emily's life became a balancing act. By day, she auditioned landing roles that turned her into a Hollywood darling. By night, she lived alone, and the villa's silence reminded her of her hollow marriage. She'd heard whispers about Ethan's past, a car accident at 16 that left him with a prosthetic leg, but he never spoke of it, and she never asked. Her father called weekly, not to check on her, but to ensure the deal was held. "Please don't mess this up, Emily," he'd say. Lillian sent occasional texts critiquing her red carpet looks. Emily learned to play the part, poised, untouchable, the perfect daughter and actress. But inside, she felt like a fraud, her emotions locked away, her marriage a contract she couldn't wait to escape. Now reborn, those memories flooded back, sharp with regret. She'd misread Ethan entirely, seeing his distance as disdain when it was fear of rejection, of being unworthy. The Manhattan loft, with its painting and mementos, had shown her his heart, and she'd been blind to it. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to the present. A text from Jake Miller. "Hey, where'd you run off to? Got big plans for you tonight. Let's celebrate you ditching that Grant guy." Emily's jaw clenched. Jake, her so-called friend, had organized this divorce party, pushing her toward a life without Ethan. In her past life, she'd let him believing he cared. Now she saw his manipulation, his charm, a mask for self-interest. She deleted the text, and her resolve was hardening. Ethan was alive somewhere in this city, and she'd find him. She remembered the gala he'd attended this night, a Silicon Valley event where he'd been closing a deal. In her past life, she'd ignored it, too wrapped up in her own resentment. Now she started the car, the engine roaring, as she sped toward the venue. Her mind replayed Henry's words. "He loved you." That year of marriage was the happiest of his life. She'd failed Ethan once, celebrating a divorce that broke him. This time, she'd fight for him no matter the cost. As she drove, a memory surfaced, Ethan's voice sharp and rushed during their marriage. "No wedding. Don't tell anyone we're married." She'd heard shame assumed he was embarrassed by her. Now she wondered if he'd been hiding his own insecurities, his prosthetic leg, a secret he feared would repulse her. The thought tightened her grip on the wheel. Her parents' coldness shaped her, teaching her to prioritize duty over love. But Ethan had seen something in her worth loving painting and collecting in a hidden loft. She wouldn't let him slip away again. The gala loomed ahead, its lights a beacon. Emily parked, took a deep breath, and stepped out, ready to rewrite their story. Emily Carter's heels clicked against the pavement as she fled the Los Angeles nightclub, the pulsing bass of the divorce party fading behind her. The banner, Emily's divorce party, burned in her mind, symbolizing the mistake she'd made in her past life. She was 24 again, reborn into the night she'd sent Ethan Grant the divorce papers, her heart heavy with the memory of his suicide and the Manhattan loft filled with his unspoken love. The neon-lit streets of Hollywood blurred past as she sped toward a Silicon Valley gala where she knew Ethan would be. Her hands gripped the wheel of her Porsche, knuckles white with purpose. She had a second chance to save him and wouldn't let it slip away. The nightclub's chaos replayed in her mind. Her friends, led by Jake Miller, had raised glasses to her freedom, their cheers oblivious to the devastation she'd caused. In her past life, Emily had leaned into their celebration, hungover and smug, when she'd faced Ethan the next morning. He'd stood in their Malibu villa holding the signed divorce papers, his face pale and eyes hollow. "Happy divorce," she'd said, a cruel smile masking her emptiness. She hadn't seen his pain, hadn't known it would drive him to end his life. Now reborn, the memory fueled her urgency. She had to find him to stop history from repeating. As she drove, Emily's thoughts drifted to the pressures that had shaped her. Her father, Richard Carter, had built Carter Communications into a media giant, but his ambition left no room for warmth. When the company faced bankruptcy, he'd pushed Emily into marrying Ethan, a tech billionaire whose bailout could save them. At 22, she'd agreed not for love, but for duty, shaped by a childhood of pleasing her distant parents. Her mother, Lillian, offered no support. Her focus was on socialite luncheons. Emily had learned to hide her feelings to play the perfect daughter and actress. That armor had kept Ethan at a distance, her resentment growing with every cold exchange. Knowing his hidden devotion, she saw her mistake not just in misjudging him, but in letting her own walls block any chance of connection. The gala venue loomed, a sleek San Francisco hotel aglow with chandeliers. Emily parked, smoothed her black dress, and stepped inside, her heart pounding. The room buzzed with tech moguls and investors, their chatter centered on a major AI contract Ethan was favored to win. She scanned the crowd, her eyes landing on him. Ethan Grant stood near a bar, striking in a tailored navy suit, his jet black hair slicked back, his green eyes sharp but guarded. His prosthetic leg, a result of a teenage car accident, was invisible to most, but Emily knew it shaped his every step. He moved with grace, no hint of weakness, yet she caught the tension in his jaw, the way he kept others at arm's length. As she approached, she overheard a group of men by the bar, their voices low and venomous. Grant snagged another contract, one sneered. No wife, no kids, just that limp he's hiding. Guy's a machine, not a man. Another laughed. I heard the accident messed him up badly below the belt, too. What kind of woman would want that? Emily's blood boiled. These were Ethan's competitors, men he'd outmaneuvered in boardrooms, now reduced to mocking his disability. She tried to confront them, to scream that Ethan was more than they'd ever be, but she held back. Her focus was on him, not their petty jealousy. Emily slipped through the crowd, her resolve hardening. She'd ignored Ethan's world in her past life, assuming he wanted her out of it. Now she saw the cruelty he faced, the isolation he endured. She reached his side, her hand brushing his arm. Ethan, she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion she couldn't hide. Heads turned, whispers rippling through the room. Ethan froze, his eyes meeting hers, a flicker of surprise giving way to unease. Emily, he said, his tone clipped. What are you doing here? She smiled, ignoring the stares. I'm here for you. Before he could respond, Jake Miller's voice cut through the noise. Emily. There you are. He strode over his blonde hair, tousled his grin too familiar. Thought you were celebrating tonight. Why are you with him? He nodded at Ethan, his tone dripping with disdain. Emily's stomach twisted. Jake, her childhood friend, had saved her from bullies in high school, but his charm had always come with expectations. In her past life, she'd let him pull her away from Ethan, believing his flattery. Now she saw his manipulation. I'm not divorced, she said firmly, her eyes locked on Ethan's. And I'm not celebrating. I'm staying with my husband. Jake's smile faltered, but he pressed on. Come on, Em. You and me, we're the real deal. This guy's just... Emily cut him off, her voice sharp. Don't. Ethan's my husband, and I don't like how you talk about him. The room hushed, eyes on her. Ethan's expression softened, confusion and hope flickering in his gaze. Jake backed off, muttering, but Emily didn't care. She turned to Ethan, her hand tightening on his arm. Let's get out of here, she whispered. As they stepped into the cool night air, Emily's phone buzzed, a text from her agent. Paparazzi got you too. Be ready for backlash. She ignored it, focusing on Ethan. In her past life, she'd let gossip and Jake's influence drive her away. Now reborn, she saw the truth. Ethan's love had been there all along, hidden behind his fear. She wouldn't let him face the world alone again. I'm not going anywhere, she said, meeting his eyes. Not this time. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't pull away. Emily felt a spark of hope. For the first time, they could rewrite their story together. Emily Carter stood beside Ethan Grant in the glittering ballroom of a San Francisco hotel, the Silicon Valley Gala buzzing with tech tycoons and investors. The air was thick with ambition, glasses clinking as deals were whispered over champagne. Emily's heart raced, her hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm, a gesture that felt both defiant and desperate. She'd been reborn into this night, the night she'd once celebrated her divorce from Ethan, only to learn too late of his suicide and unspoken love. Now at 24, she was determined to rewrite their story, to save the man she'd misjudged. Ethan, striking in a tailored navy suit, stood tall despite the prosthetic leg hidden beneath his green eyes, guarded, his jaw set. The crowd's eyes flicked toward them, whispers trailing in their wake. Emily had just silenced Jake Miller, her childhood friend, who'd tried to pull her away with his usual charm. "I'm staying with my husband," she'd declared, her voice cutting through the gala's hum. Jake had slunk back, his grin fading, but the room's attention lingered. Emily felt the weight of their stares, knowing Ethan's competitors were watching, eager for any slip. She'd overheard their cruel gossip by the bar, mocking Ethan's disability, a prosthetic leg from a teenage car accident, calling him half a man. Her blood had boiled, but she'd held back, focusing on Ethan. Now she needed to show the world and him that she was his, no matter the cost. The gala's host, Pierre Dubois, a French tech magnate, approached with his wife Claire on his arm. Pierre was known for valuing family stability and business partners, believing it reflected reliability. Emily saw her chance. As Pierre extended a hand to Ethan, she stepped forward, her smile warm but deliberate. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Dubois," she said in flawless French, her years of language coaching for film roles paying off. "Je suis Emily Carter, la femme d'Ethan. I'm Ethan's wife." The words rang out clear and proud, silencing nearby conversations. Pierre's eyes widened, impressed, while Claire smiled approvingly. "Enchanté," Pierre replied. "A man with a devoted wife is a man we can trust." Ethan stiffened beside her, his expression unreadable. "Emily," he murmured, his voice low. "What are you doing?" She tightened her grip on his arm, her eyes meeting his. "Showing them who we are," she whispered. The crowd murmured, some with curiosity, others with skepticism. Emily caught snippets. "Isn't that the actress Grant's married?" and felt a pang of fear. She'd hidden their marriage in her past life, ashamed of its transactional roots. Now she was staking her claim, but Ethan's unease was palpable. He leaned closer, his tone cold. "If this is about the divorce, talk to my lawyer. The financial ties between our companies will make it messy." His words stung, echoing the distance of their past. Emily knew he misunderstood, assuming she was here for Jake or some ulterior motive. She remembered the Manhattan loft, filled with his secret devotion photos, a painting, a lifetime of love she'd never seen. He didn't trust her yet, and she couldn't blame him. She'd been cold, too shaped by her parents' expectations and her own guarded heart. But she wouldn't back down. "No lawyers," she said firmly. "I'm here because I want to be." Ethan's eyes flickered with doubt, but he didn't pull away. The moment was interrupted by a group of men approaching competitors Ethan had outmaneuvered for the AI contract. One, a slick-haired CEO named Victor Lang, smirked. "Mr. Grant, care to introduce your companion?" The word dripped with insinuation, implying Emily was a fling, not a wife. The others chuckled, eyes darting to Ethan's leg, hidden but a known vulnerability. Emily's temper flared. She stepped forward, her voice sweet but razor-sharp. "I'm his wife, Mr. Lang." "And you just another name on a losing bid, I presume?" The crowd gasped, a few stifling laughs. Victor's face reddened, but he backed off, muttering. Emily turned to Ethan, expecting gratitude, but his expression was strained. He said, "You don't have to do this," his voice barely audible. "If it's about Jake or the East River deal, I'll handle it." Her heart sank. He thought she was using him, leveraging their marriage for some gain. In her past life, she'd let Jake's flattery and her own resentment blind her to Ethan's pain. Now she saw the fear behind his words, fear she'd reject him like his parents had after his accident. "It's not about Jake," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's about us." Before she could say more, Pierre raised a glass, calling for a toast. He noted that partnerships are built on trust and love, and nodded at Emily and Ethan. The room joined in glasses clinking, but Ethan remained tense. As the gala continued, Emily stayed by his side, deflecting questions with charm, her hand never leaving his arm. She caught him glancing at her, his green eyes searching, but he looked away every time she met his gaze, as if afraid to hope. Her phone buzzed, a text from her agent. "Pics of you two are online. Brace for backlash." Emily's stomach twisted. The gossip was starting just as she'd feared. As they left the gala, stepping into the cool San Francisco night, Emily felt the weight of her choice. She'd declared herself Ethan's wife, but the world and Ethan didn't fully believe her. She'd let rumors and misunderstandings tear them apart in her past life. Now reborn, she'd face the storm head-on. "We're in this together," she said, squeezing his hand. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he nodded, a flicker of something hope perhaps crossing his face. Emily knew the road ahead would be rough, but she'd fight for him, for them, no matter what came next. Ethan Grant stood alone on the balcony of his San Francisco penthouse, the city's skyline glittering below like a sea of stars. The cool night air did little to ease the storm in his chest. Hours earlier at the Silicon Valley Gala, Emily Carter had declared herself his wife, her hand firm on his arm, her voice cutting through the crowd's whispers. Her words, "I'm staying with my husband," had echoed in his mind, stirring a hope he'd long buried. But doubt clung to him, heavy and familiar. Was she playing a role, using him for some gain, like so many others in his life? Ethan gripped the railing, his prosthetic leg a silent reminder of the insecurities that had shaped him. Inside the penthouse was quiet, save for the soft clink of dishes as Henry, the elderly butler, tidied the kitchen. Henry had been with Ethan's family since his childhood, a constant through years of neglect and pain. Ethan turned, catching Henry's eye through the glass doors. The older man's weathered face held a knowing look that urged Ethan to speak. He stepped inside his cane, tapping softly against the hardwood. "Henry," he said, his voice low. "Why would she do that, claim me in front of everyone?" His tone betrayed the conflict within Hope, warring with disbelief. Henry set down a plate, his hand steady despite his age. "Ms. Carter sees something in you, Mr. Grant. It may be time you saw it, too." Ethan's jaw tightened. He sank into a leather armchair, his green eyes distant. "She doesn't know me," he said. "Not really. She thinks I'm whole." He gestured vaguely to his leg, the prosthetic hidden beneath his tailored pants. The car accident at 16 had taken more than flesh, it had stripped away his sense of worth, leaving scars deeper than the ones on his body. Henry sat across from him, his voice gentle but firm. "You've carried this alone too long. Please tell me what's weighing on you." Ethan hesitated, then let the words spill raw and unfiltered. "When Emily filed for divorce, the world confirmed what I already knew: I'm not enough for her, or anyone." His voice cracked, and he looked away, the memory of that day searing. In his past life, the one Emily had somehow undone, he'd stood in their Malibu villa holding the divorce papers she'd sent. Her words, "happy divorce," had cut deeper than any blade. He'd spent a year pouring everything into their marriage, funding her family's company, buying her a villa, hoping she'd see his heart. But her indifference had shattered him. Ethan continued, "I thought I could make her love me," his hands clenching. "I worked harder, built more, gave her everything I had. But she didn't want me. No one ever has." His mind flashed to his childhood in Boston, to parents whose business marriage left no room for warmth. After the accident, they'd called him flawed, turning their focus to his younger brother, Julian. Ethan had become the unwanted heir, excelling in school and tech to prove his worth, only to meet with cold indifference. When Emily left, it was like losing the last piece of hope. I had nothing left to stay for. Henry's eyes glistened, but he didn't interrupt. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "That night after the divorce was final, I went to the rooftop of this building. I didn't plan it, not really. I just wanted to see the stars, to feel something other than pain. But the moon wasn't even complete. I thought, if I go now, I won't miss anything." So I did. The confession hung in the air, heavy with the weight of a life lost to despair. Henry leaned forward, his voice soft. "You're here now, Mr. Grant. And Miss Carter's fighting for you. Does that mean something?" Ethan shook his head, his dark hair falling across his forehead. "She's an actress, Henry. She's good at playing parts. What if she's doing this for Jake Miller or for some deal? She was with him at that party tonight." His mind replayed Emily's bold declaration at the gala, how she'd silenced his competitors with a smile. But years of rejection, his parents, his peers, the whispers about his leg, made trust feel like a risk he couldn't take. "I've always been the broken one," he said. "The kid needed fixing, the half-machine man. She'll see it eventually and walk away." Henry stood, his expression resolute. "You're not broken, Mr. Grant. You built an empire, changed the world with your mind. And Ms. Carter, she's not your parents. She came to you tonight, not to Jake." He paused, his voice softening. "I've watched you love her from afar since you were 17, sneaking to her high school events, keeping her photos. You've got a heart bigger than most. Let her see it." Ethan's throat tightened. He remembered the Manhattan loft, his secret shrine to Emily, her graduation photo, her piano recital program, the painting he'd poured his soul into. He'd loved her silently, afraid to speak, afraid she'd see his flaws and turn away. As Henry returned to the kitchen, Ethan stared at the city, his mind churning. Emily's touch at the gala had felt real, her words fierce. But could he believe her? His phone buzzed a news alert about their appearance together, already sparking gossip. Actress Emily Carter, married to billionaire Ethan Grant. The comments speculated wildly, some calling her a gold digger, others mocking his disability. Ethan's chest ached, but a small part of him wondered if Emily's stand meant more than he dared hope. For the first time, he let himself imagine a world where he wasn't alone, where Emily might choose him, scars and all. Emily Carter's heart pounded as she stood outside the San Francisco hotel, the cool night air sharp against her skin. The Silicon Valley gala had ended, but the weight of her public declaration, "I'm Ethan's wife," lingered, as did the sting of Ethan Grant's doubt. His words, "If this is about the divorce, talk to my lawyer," had cut deep, echoing the distance of their past marriage. Reborn into this night, Emily knew the truth. Ethan's coldness masked fear, not disdain. She'd seen his love in the Manhattan loft in the painting and mementos he'd hidden. Now she was determined to bridge the gap between them, to save him from the despair that had led to his suicide in her past life. Ethan stood beside her, his tailored suit pristine, his green eyes guarded. The gala's gossip, cruel jabs at his prosthetic leg earned in a teenage car accident, still echoed in Emily's mind. She'd silenced his competitors with her bold stand, but Ethan's unease told her he didn't trust her motives. As they climbed into his sleek Maybach, Emily made a decision. "You're moving in with me," she said, her voice firm. "To the Malibu villa, tonight." Ethan's head snapped toward her, surprise flickering across his face. Why, he asked, his tone wary. Emily met his gaze. "Because we're married, Ethan, and I'm not letting you slip away again." The drive to Malibu was quiet, the Pacific Ocean's waves glinting under the moonlight. Emily's thoughts churned. In her past life, she'd lived alone in the villa Ethan had bought as a wedding gift, its glass walls a constant reminder of their distance. Her parents' coldness had shaped her, her father's demands to save Carter Communications, her mother's indifference learning to bury her heart. That armor had kept Ethan at arm's length, but now reborn, she saw her mistake. She wouldn't let fear or pride ruin them again. Emily poured 2 glasses of wine at the villa, her hands trembling slightly. She was nervous because of the weight of her mission and the intensity of being near Ethan. He stood in the living room, his cane resting against the couch, his posture rigid. "Emily," he said, his voice low. "What's this about? Is it Jake Miller, the East River Tech Park deal?" Emily's stomach twisted. Jake, her childhood friend, had texted earlier, pushing her to celebrate the divorce and hinting at his ambitions. Ethan must have seen the message on her phone, misreading her presence at the gala as a ploy. She set down her glass, stepping closer. "It's not about Jake," she said. "I deleted his number. Look." She opened her phone, showing the blocked contact, her eyes locked on his. "I choose you, Ethan." Ethan's expression softened, but doubt lingered. "You don't need to do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what I am." Emily knew he meant his leg, the insecurity that had haunted him since the accident. She'd learned from Henry the butler that Ethan's parents had rejected him after it focusing on his younger brother Julian. That rejection had shaped Ethan's belief that he was unworthy of love. Emily took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "You're my husband," she said, "and I want you here with me." They sat on the couch, the wine untouched. Emily's head spun from the night's events, her body leaning closer to Ethan's. She was tired, emotional, and a little reckless. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice soft. "In my dreams, I lost you. I can't let that happen again." Ethan's eyes widened, a flicker of curiosity breaking through his guard. Before he could respond, Emily's phone buzzed, a news alert: Emily Carter's gala stunt, married to billionaire Ethan Grant. The article included blurry photos of them, Ethan's cane visible, and comments accusing her of gold digging. Emily's jaw clenched. "Let them talk," she said, tossing the phone aside. "I meant what I said tonight." Ethan's hand tightened around hers, but his voice was cautious. "You don't know what you're signing up for, Emily. This," he gestured to his leg, "is not what you think." She shook her head, her eyes fierce. "I know enough. I know you're brilliant and kind, and you've been hurt. I'm not going anywhere." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his, their breaths mingling. The moment was intimate, charged, but Emily held back, sensing Ethan's fear. She wouldn't push him, not yet. Instead, she stood, pulling him up. "Come on," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "Let's unpack your things. You're home." They moved to the main bedroom, Emily dragging a suitcase Henry had sent. Ethan hesitated at the threshold, as if crossing it meant surrendering his defenses. "I've never stayed here," he admitted, his voice low. I bought it for you, but I didn't think. He trailed off his eyes on the floor. Emily's heart ached. She'd lived here alone, assuming he didn't care when he'd been protecting himself from rejection. Well, you're staying now, she said, unzipping the suitcase. She pulled out a tie, holding it up. This'll look good on you. I'm keeping it. Ethan's lips twitched a ghost of a smile. For the first time, Emily saw a crack in his armor, a hint of the man who'd painted her in a wedding dress. But as they unpacked, her phone buzzed again. Jake. You're making a mistake, Em. We're meant to be. Ditch him. Emily's blood boiled. She deleted the message, and her resolve is hardening. Ethan caught her expression, his own darkening. If it's Jake, tell me what you need, he said, his voice flat. I'll give you anything. Emily stepped closer, her hands on his chest. I need you, Ethan, just you. The moment hung between them, fragile but electric. Emily knew trust would take time, that Ethan's scars, physical and emotional, ran deep. But she was reborn, armed with the truth of his love. She'd fight the gossip, Jake's manipulation, and Ethan's doubts. As they stood in the villa, the ocean's waves crashing outside, Emily vowed to make him believe in her, in them one step at a time. Emily Carter stood in the living room of her Malibu villa, the morning sun streaming through glass walls, casting a golden glow over the unpacked suitcase at Ethan Grant's feet. It was the morning after she'd convinced him to move in, a step toward rewriting the tragic end of their marriage from her past life. Ethan, his jet-black hair slightly tousled, stood with his cane, his green eyes wary but softer than she'd ever seen. Last night she'd deleted Jake Miller's contact, declaring her choice to Ethan, I need you, just you. But the weight of external pressures loomed, threatening their fragile progress. Her phone buzzed incessantly, notifications from the gala where she'd publicly claimed Ethan as her husband had sparked a firestorm online. As Ethan sipped coffee, his posture rigid, Emily checked her phone. Social media was ablaze. Emily Carter married to billionaire Ethan Grant. Blurry photos from the gala showed her clinging to Ethan, his cane visible, fueling speculation. Comments ranged from admiration, she's living the dream, to venom, gold digger, married a disabled billionaire for his cash. Emily's jaw clenched. In her past life, she'd hidden their marriage, letting rumors fester. Now reborn, she wouldn't let lies tear them apart. But before she could address it, a knock at the door startled her. Ethan's eyes narrowed, sensing trouble. It was Jake Miller, his blonde hair disheveled, his charming grin replaced by a scowl. Em, we need to talk, he said, brushing past her into the villa. Ethan stiffened, his grip tightening on his cane. Jake barely acknowledged him, focusing on Emily. What's this about you staying with him? You were supposed to be done with this guy. His tone was possessive, as if Emily owed him loyalty. She crossed her arms, her voice cold. I told you last night, Jake, I'm with Ethan. We're done. Jake's eyes flashed with frustration. Come on, Em. You and me, we've got history. I saved you in high school, remember? Those bullies would have eaten you alive without me. Emily's stomach twisted. At 16, she'd been an easy target at their Chicago private school, skinny, stammering new money among old wealth. Jake had stepped in, his popularity shielding her, and she'd been grateful. But that gratitude had blinded her to his manipulation. Over the years, he'd leaned on their friendship, asking for favors, introductions to producers, loans for his startup, always framing it as their bond. Now she saw it for what it was. Control. I need your help, Em. Jake pressed his voice low. Ethan's bidding on the East River Tech Park. My startup's dying without that contract. Get me his bid details and we're golden. Emily's blood ran cold. In her past life, Jake had proposed to her after Ethan's death when she'd inherited his fortune. She'd thought it was friendship, but now she saw greed. No, she said, her voice steady. I won't betray Ethan, not for you, not for anyone. Jake's face darkened. You're throwing away everything for him, a guy who can't even... He gestured toward Ethan's leg, stopping short as Emily stepped forward, her eyes blazing. Don't you dare, she snapped. Ethan's my husband and he's worth more than you'll ever be. Jake laughed bitter. You'll regret this, Em. I gave you a chance. He stormed out, leaving a chill in the air. Ethan's expression was unreadable, but Emily saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. If you need something from him, I can... No, Ethan. Emily interrupted, her hand on his arm. I don't need Jake. Please believe me. Before they could continue, her phone lit up with a new alert. Leaked photos. Emily Carter's marriage a sham. The article posted by an anonymous source featured more gala photos with captions accusing her of using Ethan for fame. Comments flooded in. She's just after his money. Poor guy stuck with a fake wife. Emily's heart sank. She knew Jake was behind it, retaliating for her refusal. Ethan saw the screen, his jaw tightening. "This is my fault," he said, his voice low. "I'm dragging you down." Emily shook her head, her resolve hardening. "No, Ethan. They're wrong, and I'll prove it." She opened Instagram, her fingers flying as she crafted a post. She chose a candid photo from the gala. Ethan was looking at her, his green eyes soft and no Cain in sight. The caption was simple: "My husband, my love, always." She hit the post, her heart racing. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Fans rallied. "They're gorgeous together, that's love," haters. Others were cruel, still a gold digger. But the tide began to turn, her followers defending her authenticity. Emily showed Ethan the comments, a smile tugging at her lips. "See, they're coming around." He didn't smile, but his hand covered hers tentatively. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice raw. "You don't need to fight for me." Emily's throat tightened. She knew his doubt stemmed from years of rejection, his parents' neglect, the taunts about his leg. She'd fed that doubt in her past life, walking away without a fight. Now reborn, she leaned closer, her voice fierce. "I'm fighting because I see you, Ethan, all of you, and I'm not going anywhere." As they stood in the villa, the ocean's waves crashing outside, Emily felt the weight of Jake's betrayal and the public scrutiny, but she also felt hope. Ethan's hand lingered on hers, a small crack in his armor. She'd face the gossip, Jake's schemes, and Ethan's fears one step at a time. They were together now, and she'd make sure the world and Ethan knew it was real. Ethan Grant sat on the plush couch in the Malibu villa, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the glass-walled living room. Emily Carter sat beside him, her auburn hair catching the light, her hand resting lightly on his. The air between them was charged, a fragile trust growing after she'd moved him into the villa and faced down Jake Miller's betrayal. The online backlash from their gala appearance still buzzed accusations of gold-digging, cruel jabs at Ethan's prosthetic leg. But Emily's Instagram post, "My husband, my love," had shifted the tide, her fans rallying around their marriage. Yet Ethan's green eyes remained guarded, his cane leaning against the couch, a reminder of the insecurities that haunted him. Emily, reborn with the knowledge of his suicide in her past life, was determined to break through his walls. Ethan's low voice broke the quiet. He said, "You didn't have to post that picture," his fingers tightening around hers. "You're risking your career for me." Emily shook her head, her eyes fierce. "I'm risking nothing, Ethan. I want the world to know we're together." His lips pressed into a thin line, doubt flickering. She knew why he'd spent a lifetime believing he was unworthy, rooted in a childhood of rejection and pain. In her past life, she'd never asked about his past, too wrapped in her own resentment. Now she needed to understand him, to heal the wounds that had driven him to despair. "Tell me about you," she said softly, shifting closer. "Before we met before, everything." Ethan's gaze dropped to the floor, his jaw tightening. She thought he'd shut her out momentarily, but then he spoke, his voice raw. "I was 16 when it happened. He began a car accident in Boston. I was driving with my dad late at night. A truck ran a red light and hit us head on. I woke up in the hospital, my left leg gone below the knee." He paused, his hand brushing the prosthetic hidden beneath his pants. "My parents, they didn't handle it well." Emily listened, her heart aching. She'd learned from Henry the butler that Ethan's parents, wealthy Boston elites, had a cold, businesslike marriage. But she needed Ethan's words, his truth. "They were obsessed with perfection," he continued. "My dad ran a hedge fund, my mom a law firm. I was their heir, expected to be flawless, top grades, varsity sports, the works. After the accident, they looked at me like I was broken. They stopped talking to me and started focusing on my younger brother, Julian. I heard them once arguing in my hospital room while I pretended to sleep. Dad said, 'He's useless now, we need another son.'" Emily's breath caught her hand, squeezing his. Ethan's voice grew quieter. "I was sent to a rehab center in Chicago to recover. That's where I met you." Her eyes widened. She'd known about his accident, but not this. "Me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, a faint smile breaking through his pain. "You were there recovering from a dance injury. You were bright like the sun. Always talking, always laughing, even when you were in pain. You'd sit on the rooftop at night discussing the stars or the hospital food. I was a mess ready to give up, but you made me want to keep going." Emily's mind raced back to her time in rehab at 16 after a knee injury ended her dream of becoming a professional dancer. She remembered a quiet boy always in a mask watching her from afar. She'd thought he was shy, not realizing it was Ethan hiding his scars. "I didn't know it was you," she whispered, tears welling. Ethan's smile faded. "I didn't want you to. I was ashamed of my leg of myself. But you talked to me like I was normal. One night you said being alive's enough, you can still feel the sun, eat good food." It sounds stupid now, but it kept me from falling apart. He looked away, his voice dropping. "I wanted to tell you how I felt, but I couldn't. My parents had drilled it into me, don't show weakness, don't need anyone. After rehab, they shipped me to a boarding school in England. I didn't see you again, but I followed you, your high school recitals, your first commercials. I was at your graduation in the crowd taking that picture." Emily's heart clenched, remembering the photo in his Manhattan loft, his shy smile as he'd captured her speech. "When your dad's company needed a bailout, I saw my chance," Ethan said. "I proposed the marriage thinking maybe I could be close to you. But I was too afraid to show you who I was." Emily's tears spilled over. She'd misjudged him, seeing his distance as disdain when it was fear. In her past life, her walls built from her parents' coldness, and the pressure to save Carter Communications had kept her from seeing his heart. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know." Ethan shook his head. "You couldn't have. I hid it too well. When you filed for divorce, it felt like proof I'd never be enough, not for you, not for anyone. That's why I—" He trailed off, unable to say suicide. Emily's chest ached, knowing that pain had driven him to his rooftop in her past life. She leaned closer, her hand cupping his face. "You're enough, Ethan. More than enough." His eyes met hers, raw and searching, but he didn't pull away. The moment was fragile, a bridge forming between them. Emily knew the road ahead, Jake's schemes, the public's gossip would test them. But she was reborn, armed with the truth of his love and his pain. She'd fight for him to make him believe he was worthy. As the sun set over the Pacific, casting a warm glow over them, Emily vowed to heal the boy who'd watched the stars alone, starting with the man before her now. The Malibu villa was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, the Pacific Ocean's waves whispering against the shore. Emily Carter sat on the balcony, her auburn hair loose, her mind replaying Ethan Grant's confession from earlier that day, his childhood pain, the car accident that took his leg, and the rejection from his parents that left him believing he was unworthy of love. She'd held him vowing he was enough, but his guarded eyes told her trust was still a distant shore. Reborn into this second chance, Emily knew Ethan's suicide in her past life loomed as a warning. She had to help him heal, but the weight of Jake Miller's betrayal and the online gossip accusing her of gold digging pressed heavily. She needed an ally, someone who understood Ethan's heart. Inside, Ethan was in his study, reviewing contracts, his cane propped against the desk. The door creaked open, and Henry, the elderly butler, entered with a tea tray. His white hair gleamed under the lamplight, his weathered face etched with a quiet strength. Henry had been a constant in Ethan's life, more father than servant, and Emily sensed he held the key to reaching Ethan. She slipped inside, lingering by the doorway unnoticed. Henry set the tray down, his voice gentle. "You're working late again, Mr. Grant. You should rest. Miss Carter's waiting for you." Ethan's lips twitched, a faint smile fading quickly. "She's too good for me, Henry," he said, his voice low. "She's fighting for me, but I don't know why. I'm broken." The word hung heavy, a confession of the insecurities rooted in his teenage accident and his parents' rejection. Emily's heart clenched, but she stayed silent, wanting to hear more. Henry sat across from Ethan, his eyes warm but firm. "You're not broken, Mr. Grant. You've built an empire and changed lives with your work. And Ms. Carter, she sees the man I've always seen." Ethan's gaze dropped to his hands, his fingers tracing the edge of his desk. "You've always believed in me," he said softly, "more than my parents ever did." Henry's expression softened, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "I had to," he said. "After your accident, when they turned away, I couldn't let you face it alone." Emily's breath caught. She'd learned from Ethan about his parents' coldness, but Henry's role was clearer now. He wasn't just a butler, he was Ethan's anchor. Henry leaned forward, his voice steady. "I lost my wife Margaret when I was young. Cancer took her before we could start a family. I promised myself I'd look after you like my own, especially when your parents failed you. I saw you fight through pain and build your company from nothing. And I saw you love Miss Carter even when you thought she'd never love you back." Ethan's eyes widened, a flush creeping up his neck. You knew, Henry nodded. The loft in Manhattan, the fan club you funded anonymously, and how you watched her films. You've loved her since you were kids in that rehab center. Emily's heart raced. She hadn't known Ethan funded her fan club, a silent force behind her Hollywood rise. She remembered the mysterious supporter her agent mentioned, who built her fan infrastructure without ever showing their face. It was Ethan, always in the shadows, lifting her. Henry continued, his voice earnest. Ms. Carter's different now. She's fighting for you, standing up to the world. Don't push her away because you're afraid. You deserve happiness, Ethan. Ethan's jaw tightened, his green eyes glistening. What if she sees me, the real me, and leaves like they did? He gestured to his leg, the prosthetic symbolizing his deepest fears. Henry's voice grew firm. She's not your parents. She's not Jake Miller. She posted that picture today, calling you her love in front of millions. That's not acting, that's courage. Give her a chance to know you. Ethan looked away, his hands clenching. I want to, he whispered. But every time I let myself hope, it hurts more when it falls apart. Emily couldn't stay silent any longer. She stepped into the room, her voice soft but resolute. It won't fall apart, Ethan. Both men startled, Ethan's eyes wide with surprise. She crossed to him, kneeling beside his chair. I heard everything, and I'm not leaving. I know about the fan club, the loft, and how you've always loved me. I was blind before, but I see you now. Ethan's breath hitched, his hand hovering over hers, hesitant. Henry stood, a slight smile on his lips. I'll leave you two to talk, he said, slipping out quietly. Emily took Ethan's hand, her eyes locked on his. I'm sorry I didn't see you sooner, she said, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Ethan's gaze softened, a flicker of hope breaking through his doubt. He said, you don't know what you're signing up for, his voice raw. Emily smiled, squeezing his hand. I know enough, and I want to learn more. The moment was fragile, a step toward trust. Outside, the ocean murmured, and Emily knew the fight wasn't over. Jake's schemes and public scrutiny still loomed. But with Henry's guidance and Ethan's truth laid bare, she felt stronger. She'd make Ethan believe in their love, one honest moment at a time. The Malibu villa hummed with quiet anticipation as Emily Carter stood before a full-length mirror, her reflection draped in a flowing white gown. The dress was a replica of the one in Ethan Grant's oil painting, the one she'd seen in his secret Manhattan loft in her past life, a vision of her smiling, radiant, a dream he'd held for years. Today that dream would become reality in a sun-dappled vineyard in Napa Valley. With the knowledge of Ethan's love and tragic end, Emily had fought to reach this moment, overcoming his doubts, Jake Miller's betrayal, and the public's cruel gossip. Her auburn hair was pinned with delicate hydrangeas, and her heart raced with joy and determination. She was 24, and today she'd marry Ethan, not for a contract, but for love. Ethan waited under a wooden arch in the vineyard, surrounded by rolling hills and blooming vines. His navy suit was perfectly tailored, his jet black hair catching the late afternoon light, his green eyes nervous but bright. His cane rested nearby, a subtle nod to the prosthetic leg that had long defined his insecurities. Emily had spent weeks planning this wedding, keeping it small, no reporters, no red carpet, just close friends, and Henry the butler, who'd been Ethan's anchor. The memory of the loft filled with Ethan's mementos, her graduation photo, her piano recital program, the painting had inspired her. She wanted to make his hidden vow, may Emily always be happy, come true, starting with this day. As Emily stepped toward the arch, soft piano music drifted through the air, a nod to her high school performances Ethan had secretly attended. Their friends, her agent, a few actors, Ethan's trusted assistant, smiled from simple wooden chairs. Henry stood at the front, his white hair gleaming, his eyes glistening with pride. Emily's parents were absent. Their coldness had shaped her past, but she'd chosen to leave them behind, focusing on the family she was building with Ethan. Her heart swelled as she reached him, his hand trembling as he took hers. You're beautiful, he whispered, his voice catching. Emily smiled, her eyes locked on his. So are you. The officiant, a local vintner with a warm smile, began the ceremony. Emily had insisted on writing their own vows, wanting Ethan to hear her truth. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath, her voice steady but emotional. Ethan, I was blind, once caught up in my own walls and fears. I didn't see you, the boy who watched me from the crowd, the man who loved me enough to let me go. But I see you now, and I choose you every day, every scar, every moment. You're my home, and all I want is for you to stay, to live with me always. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, his grip tightening on her hand. Ethan's turn came, and his voice was soft, almost breaking. Emily, I never thought I deserved happiness. My whole life I was told I was less because of my leg and my mistakes. I loved you when I saw you in that rehab center. You were so bright and alive. I built a world to keep you safe, but was too afraid to let you in. You make me want to live to believe I'm enough. I promise to love you and fight for you every day. His voice cracked on the last words, and Emily's tears spilled over her heart full. The officiant smiled. Do you, Emily, take Ethan to be your husband? I do, she said, her voice clear. And you, Ethan, I do, he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands contrasting their contract marriage at City Hall. The vineyard erupted in applause as they kissed, friends cheering, Henry wiping his eyes. Emily pressed her forehead to Ethan's, whispering, Stay with me always. He nodded, his smile fragile but real. The reception was intimate, with lantern-lit tables and laughter under the stars. Emily and Ethan danced slowly, her head on his shoulder, his cane set aside. She felt his warmth and strength and knew they'd crossed a threshold. The loft's painting had been a dream. This was their reality. Emily's phone buzzed in her clutch as they swayed, ignored but persistent. Later, she'd find messages from her agent. The online backlash had quieted her fans, embracing Ethan after her Instagram post. A few trolls lingered, but the narrative had shifted. They're the real deal, one comment read. Jake Miller's schemes had faded, his startup floundering without Ethan's bid details. Emily didn't care. She'd faced the world for Ethan, and they'd won. The memory of his suicide, the pain of her past life, felt distant now. She looked at Ethan, his smile brighter than she'd ever seen, and knew they were building something new, a love that could weather any storm. The night ended with them sitting on a vineyard bench, stars overhead, the air sweet with grapevines. Ethan's hand found hers, his voice soft. I used to watch the stars alone, he said. Not anymore. Emily leaned into him, her heart steady. Never again, she promised. The wedding wasn't the end of their struggles. She'd have films to shoot, he'd have empires to run, but it was a beginning, a vow to face it together. The Malibu villa glowed under the soft light of a full moon, its glass walls reflecting the Pacific Ocean's restless waves. Emily Carter and Ethan Grant sat on their balcony, a blanket draped over their shoulders, their hands entwined, and months had passed since their wedding in the Napa Valley vineyard, a day that had transformed Ethan's hidden dream, painted in his Manhattan loft, into a reality. Emily, reborn with this knowledge of Ethan's suicide in her past life, had fought to save him, overcoming his insecurities, Jake Miller's betrayal, and the public's harsh scrutiny. Now at 24, she rested against Ethan, his warmth a quiet anchor. His jet-black hair fell across his forehead, his green eyes no longer guarded but soft, reflecting the stars above. Life hadn't slowed down. Emily's acting career was soaring. A new film, with a renowned director, had her on set for long hours, her face splashed across billboards. Ethan's tech empire demanded his attention, and his AI innovations reshaped industries. Yet they carved out moments like this, watching the stars from their villa, a ritual from Ethan's childhood solitude. You used to do this alone, Emily said softly, her voice breaking the ocean's hum. Ethan's lips curved a smile she'd grown to cherish. Not anymore, he replied, squeezing her hand. You're my sky now. Their journey hadn't been flawless. Emily's demanding schedule meant early mornings and late nights, sometimes pulling her to Los Angeles or New York for weeks. Ethan, still learning to trust, occasionally retreated into silence, his old fears rooted in his parents' rejection and the car accident that took his leg resurfacing. But they'd learned to talk, to face the rough patches together. Emily would call him from set, her voice teasing, "Miss your human pillow." Yet Ethan would laugh, his cane tapping, as he paced his office, planning their next dinner under the stars. Their love was imperfect, messy, but fiercely theirs. The public's perception had shifted since the gala where Emily had declared herself Ethan's wife. Her Instagram post, "My husband." My love had quelled much of the backlash, her fans rallying around their story. But the real turning point came when Ethan's secret was exposed. A fan on Twitter uncovered his anonymous fan club account, which had quietly funded Emily's Hollywood rise. Posts surfaced Emily's smile in that commercial could light up the world. Wife supremacy forever. Fans were charmed, dubbing him the ultimate stan. One tweeted that he's been her biggest fan since high school. I'm crying. Another wrote, forget gold digger, this is love. The comments flooded Emily's phone, and she'd read the best ones to Ethan, laughing. They're obsessed with you, she'd tease, straddling his lap in their villa, almost as much as I am. Ethan had flushed, embarrassed but pleased. Can you screenshot those? He'd asked. I want to send them gifts. Emily had laughed, kissing his cheek. You're rich, but you can't gift all of Twitter. The exposure had humanized Ethan, turning him from a cold billionaire into a devoted husband. The last of the trolls faded, their accusations drowned out by support. Jake Miller's schemes had collapsed, his startup failed without the East River Tech Park contract, and his attempts to smear Emily had backfired. She'd blocked him, cutting ties with a past that no longer defined her. Henry the butler, who'd raised Ethan like a son, remained steady. He'd visit the villa, bringing homemade soup and stories of Ethan's teenage stubbornness. Henry once said he'd sneak out to your recitals, Ms. Carter said, his eyes twinkling. Thought I didn't notice. Emily cherished these glimpses into Ethan's quiet devotion, each one a thread tying her to the boy who'd loved her from afar. Her family, her cold father Richard, and distant mother Lillian, had faded from her life. When Richard called, demanding she leverage Ethan's wealth for Carter Communications, Emily hung up, choosing her new family over old obligations. Tonight, as they sat under the stars, Emily traced the gold band on Ethan's finger, a match to hers from their wedding. You're happy, right? She asked, her voice soft. Ethan turned to her, his eyes glistening. More than I ever thought I could be, he said. You make me want to live, Emily, every day. Her heart swelled the memory of his suicide, a rooftop, a half moon, a life lost, receding like a bad dream. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, breathing in his woody scent. You're my miracle, she whispered, her words a vow. The future stretched before them, not without challenges. Emily's next film, an Oscar contender, would pull her away again. Ethan's company faced a new competitor demanding his focus. But they'd face it together, mornings with coffee and kisses, evenings with walks along the beach, Ethan's cane steady beside her. The stars above were full bright, and a cry from the lonely nights Ethan once knew. Emily smiled, her hand in his. We're forever, she said. Ethan's smile was whole, his soul alight. Yeah, he replied, forever's ours.